He looked her in the eye, then said the words that shattered everything. At a quiet rural train station, a black woman steps off the train after 3 weeks of travel, hopeful, brave, ready to start a new life with the man who wrote her love letters for months. But when he sees her skin, he recoils. "You didn't tell me you were black." In that moment, everything changes. What started as a dream of escape from city prejudice turns into public rejection until a mysterious voice cuts through the humiliation. "Throwing money at your mistake won't make her disappear, Malcolm." That voice belonged to the wealthiest farmer in town. And what he did next set off a chain reaction that would expose decades of buried injustice and shake an entire community to its core. But this isn't just a story about racism. It's about legacy, dignity, and a woman who turned rejection into revolution. If you believe justice should be louder than hate, hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and let us know in the comments what would you have done if you were in her shoes. Because sometimes, history doesn't repeat itself, it gets rewritten. The air at Jasper Creek Station was thick with the scent of coal smoke and spring blossoms. Nadine Carter adjusted the delicate hat she'd picked out weeks ago, one that once made her feel elegant, hopeful. Now, as she stood on the platform, it felt like a cruel joke perched atop her head. The man in front of her, Malcolm Whitaker, was visibly pale, his jaw slightly slack as if he'd seen a ghost in the middle of daylight. "This isn't going to work," he stammered, eyes darting to the side. "You didn't mention you were black." Nadine, her heart sinking but spine straight, finished the sentence he couldn't say aloud. "I didn't mention that my skin is dark, but my feelings are as real as yours, Mr. Whitaker." Around them, curious stares began to collect like storm clouds. 3 weeks of cross-country train rides, 6 months of handwritten letters, and a trunk full of dreams crushed in less than a minute. Malcolm shifted uncomfortably, his hand clutching a now drooping bouquet. "In your letters, I imagined someone different. You wrote so well. Couldn't you have warned me?" "Warned you about what?" she asked, voice steady despite the tremble in her chest. "That I'm a woman of color with a heart as open as yours?" Malcolm looked around nervously. Jasper Creek, a predominantly white farming town in Kansas, wasn't used to disruptions, especially not ones wrapped in grace and dignity like Nadine. "It's the community," he mumbled. "My business, my reputation. I spent all I had to get here," Nadine whispered, her hands tightening around the straps of her travel case. Then he reached into his coat pocket, pulled out crumpled bills. "Here, this should cover a return ticket," he muttered. And just like that, he tried to erase her, until a voice boomed behind him. A voice that would change everything. The moment hung heavy until a voice, calm yet firm as thunder, sliced through the awkward silence. "Is that really your solution, Malcolm? Throw cash at a woman you invited here, hoping she'd disappear quietly?" Malcolm Whitaker froze, his shoulders tensing at the sound of the voice behind him. Turning slowly, he came face to face with Elias Granger, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing jeans and a button-down shirt that somehow looked tailored despite its simplicity. The rich tan of his skin spoke of years spent under the Kansas sun, working land that had made him both respected and quietly feared. "This is none of your concern, Elias," Malcolm snapped, though his voice betrayed unease. "It becomes my concern when a man I've known for 15 years acts like a spineless boy," Elias said coldly, before shifting his attention to Nadine. His gaze softened. "Miss Carter, I'm Elias Granger. I own Greenridge Farms just outside town. Forgive the interruption, but may I offer you a safe place to stay until you decide what comes next?" Nadine hesitated. She had long learned that kindness from strangers often came dressed in expectations. Still, there was something disarming in Elias's tone. No pity, no performance, just quiet conviction. Malcolm sputtered. "You can't be serious. What will people say?" Elias offered a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "The same people who depend on my land? Let them talk." And they would talk, Nadine knew. In towns like Jasper Creek, word traveled faster than trains. But standing in the shadow of rejection, and offered the dignity she had been denied, Nadine gave a slow nod. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I like that." As Elias lifted her trunk with practiced strength, Malcolm stepped back, smaller now, insignificant. He had made his choice. So had she. Days passed quietly at Greenridge Farms, but the town of Jasper Creek was buzzing. Whispers of the colored woman at Granger's estate rippled through church pews and grocery lines. Elias noticed, of course. During their afternoon teas under the porch awning, he'd nod toward the increasing visits from concerned neighbors who conveniently forgot why they had come. "You've become the local curiosity, Miss Carter," he joked one day. Nadine smiled, her expression more weary than amused. "I've always been a curiosity, Mr. Granger." The difference is, now I'm holding porcelain instead of survival. When Malcolm Whitaker finally mustered the nerve to visit, it wasn't to apologize. He arrived unannounced, gripping his worn fedora, eyes darting about nervously. "Elias," he began, "just checking in on Miss Carter. The community is, well, worried." "Delighted to hear that," Elias replied dryly. "She's right here, why not ask her yourself?" Nadine entered the room with the poise of a woman transformed. Dressed in a soft blue gown, Mrs. Emery, the housekeeper, had lovingly adjusted for her. She no longer resembled the weary stranger from the station. "Mr. Whitaker," she greeted him, her voice cool. "What a surprise." He cleared his throat. "It's just improper. A single woman staying in a bachelor's home, and she being—" He stopped. "Black?" Elias finished, voice like ice. Harold turned pale. "There are talks of raising money for her return trip to Boston." "How generous," Nadine said, lips curling. "But I won't be needing that. Mr. Granger has offered me a position as his estate librarian." "Librarian?" Malcolm scoffed. "That's absurd." "Absurd would be ignoring that the Granger Library contains original records of this entire region," Elias cut in. "And Miss Carter is more than qualified." Malcolm's face contorted. He didn't understand. Not yet. But Nadine was only beginning. The town hall of Jasper Creek had never seen such a turnout. Farmers, merchants, and legacy families packed the small chamber to capacity, murmuring anxiously. At the center of the uproar stood Malcolm Whitaker, red-faced and frantic. "This is a disgrace," he bellowed. "Elias Granger is openly mocking our traditions, housing that woman." Before he could continue, the double doors creaked open. Silence fell like a curtain. Elias Granger stepped inside, composed as ever, followed closely by Nadine Carter. She walked with the grace of someone who had nothing to prove, only truth to present. Her navy dress moved like silk armor, her expression serene but unshakable. "I appreciate the invitation," Elias began, his voice reaching every corner of the room. "But let me clarify. Miss Carter is not here as my guest. She is here as the legal representative of a matter that affects every family in this town." Malcolm scoffed. "Legal representative? She's a former teacher, not a lawyer. You've lost your mind." Nadine opened her leather briefcase. "In addition to being a certified educator," she said calmly, "I hold power of attorney for the estate of Joseph Grant, the man who was granted this land by the governor in 1866. The name struck the room like a thunderclap. Elder townsfolk paled visibly. "That's a myth," Malcolm snapped. "A bedtime story." "Then explain this," she said, laying out the original land deed, signed and sealed. "In these," she added, revealing supporting records, correspondence, maps, legal notices, all verifying Joseph Grant's ownership of 60% of Jasper Creek's current territory, including Malcolm's store. Judge Wexler, an older man respected across counties, leaned in, adjusting his spectacles. "These appear authentic." Panic surged in Malcolm's eyes. Forgery. But his voice quivered, because somewhere deep down, even he could feel the weight of the truth. And Nadine was only just getting started. 6 months after the storm that shook Jasper Creek, the town no longer looked the same. The Grant Carter Foundation, funded in part through a legal settlement and community contributions, had already awarded scholarships to over a dozen underprivileged students and financed the construction of affordable housing near the town's east end. At the heart of this transformation stood Nadine Carter, no longer seen as an outsider, but as the woman who had turned shame into strength, rejection into rebirth. Ironically, Malcolm Whitaker's former storefront now served as Jasper Creek's first public library, its shelves lined not just with books but with truth. Stories that had been buried were now accessible to all. Malcolm had left town quietly, selling his assets for pennies on the dollar. Rumors placed him working behind a hardware counter 2 towns over, his pride reduced to a whisper. "You could have taken everything," Elias said one crisp October afternoon as they strolled through what had become a cultural garden on the Granger estate. Children played where exclusive garden parties once unfolded. "I could have," Nadine replied with a small smile. "But revenge lasts a moment." This, she gestured to the laughter, the flowers, the future, this lasts generations. Reporters and historians came in waves, eager to document the case that set a precedent. Nadine began speaking at universities, sharing not just her personal story, but the legal process that uncovered decades of injustice. At a gala inside the newly christened Grant Granger house, Judge Wexler stood to toast. "To the woman who reminded us that justice is not noise but a steady hand turning pages we tried to forget." Elias took Nadine's hand beneath the table. "The best thing Malcolm ever did was reject you," he whispered. She laughed softly. He wrote the prologue. I wrote the story. As the sun dipped below the Kansas horizon, the bronze plaque at the center of the square glinted in gold, to Joseph Grant, whose land and legacy has returned home. What we just witnessed isn't simply a story about rejection, land rights, or even race. It's a story about how dignity, truth, and the courage to stand your ground can rewrite an entire legacy. Nadine Carter didn't burn down the system that tried to erase her. She exposed it. She didn't seek revenge. She rebuilt justice. The lesson? Your silence won't protect you, but your voice just might protect generations. In a world that often rewards those who conform, be the one who confronts. In communities built on buried truths, be the one who unearths them not out of anger, but out of vision. Because the real power doesn't come from status, color, or wealth. It comes from having the courage to turn humiliation into healing and pain into progress. If this story moved you, don't scroll past. Share it. Talk about it. Start the conversations others are too afraid to. Hit subscribe, and let your voice stand with those who have been silenced too long. Let's not wait for another generation to fix what we have the power to change today. Justice begins when someone decides to stop surviving and start leading. Will that someone be you?